I was having coffee with a friend the other day when he just slammed his utility bill down on the table.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and he was fixated on this one tiny line item, some obscure service delivery surcharge, and his face was, I'm not kidding, practically turning purple.
I think we've all been there.
Right. He looked at me with this mix of just exhaustion and rage and said, it never ends. They're finding ways to charge us just for existing. Next thing you know, they'll be taxing the air we breathe.
It's a common feeling, that sense of being nickeled and dimed for just being alive.
It was such a dramatic moment watching him spiral over a $3 fee. And he was so convinced that this level of government overreach was a strictly modern nightmare, a unique symptom of our current times.
That it's something new.
Exactly. But as he sat there ranting about how unprecedented this greed was, I had to bite my tongue. Because looking at his bill, I wasn't thinking about modern bureaucracy. I was thinking about Emperor Vespasian.
Oh.
My friend thought taxing existence was hyperbole, But he didn't realize how historically close to the mark he actually was. If he knew that governments once found a way to monetize the most basic, unglamorous biological function imaginable,
Literally turning public urinals into a revenue stream for the state.
he might realize that this surcharge isn't a new invention. It's just the latest version of a very old, very smelly logic. If it's part of your daily life, the system will find a way to make you pay for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're moving beyond that visceral, immediate outrage over a surprise utility fee to examine the deep historical roots and the structural logic that underpins it.
Right.
Our mission today is to do a deep dive into how and why governments consistently devise taxes on essential goods and services. And we're looking at this through the lens of elite theories, this idea that the administrative state is fundamentally the arm of ruling minorities, to understand the structural inevitability of this whole upside-down system.
And that's the key question, isn't it?
Is this just random political greed, or is it a predictable consequence of what some call the oligarchies' iron law?
That framing is so crucial because it shifts our perspective entirely. We're not just, chronicling a bunch of examples of bad taxation. We are searching for the fundamental, enduring mechanisms that consolidate power and allocate resources. When we look at history and contemporary systems, we see a pattern, and it reflects this iron law. If the state is run by and for a powerful minority, the methods used to generate the necessary revenue, the fiscal policy itself, will always favor the few.
Often by extracting resources from the daily necessities of the many.
Exactly.
Let's ground this in history then. Starting with what is, I think, the absolute perfect example of taxing existence. Ancient Rome and that enduring maxim pecunia non olet.
Money doesn't stink.
Money doesn't stink.
Yeah.
We need to fully appreciate the context of Emperor Vespasian's decision, right, as it was recorded by the historian Suetonius.
This anecdote perfectly encapsulates how ruling elites strategically dismiss moral or, aesthetic objections for the sake of fiscal stability. Vespasian, he came to power during a really tumultuous period, the year of the 4 emperors.
Right, the treasury must have been empty.
It was severely depleted. So he was looking for novel, reliable, recurring revenue streams. And his solution was to reinstate the vectigal urinae, the tax on public urinals.
Which had been abolished by Nero, of all people.
Abolished by Nero, perhaps because even he deemed it too distasteful. But Vespasian saw an untapped resource.
It really is the ultimate tax on necessity.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't avoid a basic biological function. So the government monetizes the service provided to allow that function to happen in public.
Precisely. And the political resistance wasn't insignificant. His own son, Titus, who would go on to succeed him as emperor, found the tax to have odious origins. He complained bitterly to his father about it.
He felt it was beneath the office.
Exactly. That it undermined the dignity of the imperial office. Which brings us to that famous retort that has echoed through the centuries.
The moment with the coin.
Vespasian, according to Suetonius, held up a gold coin that had been collected from this new urine tax revenue, and he placed it right under Titus's nose.
And he asked him?
He asked his son, simply, if the money smelled. When Titus was forced to admit that no, the coin did not carry any odor, Vespasian declared the famous line, pecunia non olet.
Money doesn't stink.
Money doesn't stink.
It's a complete rejection of the moral objection. It says essentially, I don't care about the virtue of the source. I only care about the utility of the revenue. It provides an immediate, usable resource. If Vespasian were alive today, what modern surcharge would he be holding up under Titus's nose?
Oh, it would absolutely be that utility surcharge your friend was complaining about. or maybe the tax on essential medicines. The fundamental insight here is that this exchange establishes an enduring Machiavellian principle of governance,
which is
the ethical foundation of a revenue mechanism is secondary to the fiscal outcome. The purpose of the tax is to reinforce the operational logic of the administrative state to maximize revenue for stability, regardless of the perceived virtue of the source or the burden it places on the poor.
So if the ancient world monetized a basic biological function, let's see how structurally similar the idea of taxing existence is in our modern context, especially when we look at taxes on necessities. Let's pivot from Vespasian's smelly tax to the modern ledger and the, frankly, stark reality of upside-down tax systems in the U.S.
Right. And when we examine state and local tax systems in the U.S. today, the idea of taxing existence is implemented with shocking efficiency through regressive policies. The core finding from research is that the vast majority, we're talking 41 states, have tax systems that are fundamentally upside down.
Upside down meaning they place a far greater tax burden relative to income on low-income families than on the wealthiest citizens.
Far greater.
So let's get concrete with the nationwide average. What does that disparity look like in hard numbers for the average American taxpayer?
The structural imbalance is severe. The nationwide average effective state and local tax rate faced by the lowest income 20% of taxpayers is nearly 60% higher than the rate paid by the top 1% of households.
60% higher.
Yes. We are talking about a rate of 11.4% for the lowest earners versus a significantly lower 7.2% for the ultra-wealthy.
That 11.4% versus 7.2% gap is massive. It means a household that is struggling to afford rent and groceries is, structurally, paying a higher percentage of its income to state and local governments than someone whose annual earnings might be in the millions or even billions.
Precisely. And the data shows this isn't an anomaly, it's systemic. It's a feature, not a bug. In 42 states, the top 1% of earners pay a lower effective tax rate than the bottom 20%.
42 states.
And to emphasize just how perverse this structure is, in 35 states, the lowest 20% of earners actually face a higher tax rate than any other income group, despite having the absolute least capacity to absorb that cost.
Okay, we have to identify the levers creating this imbalance. It's clear the system is designed this way. What specific taxes are the culprits in creating this regressive structure?
The major culprit is the heavy reliance on consumption taxes, so sales and excise taxes. When we analyze the 10 most regressive states, 8 of them derive over half their total revenue from these sources.
And that reliance is a choice.
It's absolutely a choice. It's often made by states that either lack a personal income tax entirely or choose to implement a flat-rate income tax rather than a truly progressive, graduated structure.
That makes sense intuitively. But let's break down exactly why taxes on things like utilities or gas or basic goods, these excise and sale taxes, are so inherently regressive.
The regressivity stems from the functional limitations of the tax base itself. Think about it. Consider a tax on essential goods or services like utilities or gasoline. Everyone needs gas to get to work, and everyone needs electricity to heat or cool their home. But the amount of gas a person can use, or the basic utility consumption they require just to maintain existence, it eventually hits a practical maximum.
You can only drive one car to work, and you can only heat one small apartment, regardless of whether you make $20,000 or $20 million.
Exactly. And let's make this tangible. Imagine a $50 tax on utility consumption in a given year. For a low-income household earning, say, $30,000 annually, that $50 represents 0.17% of their yearly income.
Okay.
But now imagine a household earning $300,000. That same $50 tax is only 0.017% of their annual income. The wealthy taxpayer is barely even aware of the fee, while the low-income earner is forced to dedicate a share of their scarce resources that is proportionally 10 times higher.
That is a stark calculation. In effect, the tax is fixed, but its bite is inverse to your income. That's why the data shows the lowest income 20% nationally pay 7.0% of their income towards sales and excise taxes, while the top 1% pay a mere 1.0% rate.
And that's the modern version of Vespasian's logic.
Monetize the unavoidable constants of daily life.
And this just reinforces the counterpoint. The progressive graduated rate income tax is the only major tax type under which effective tax rates actually rise with income. States that rely more heavily on these graduated income taxes for revenue consistently show far less regressive or even slightly progressive overall tax systems. Without that mechanism, the system is fundamentally designed to disproportionately burden the poor.
And this isn't just an internal issue in the U.S. either. When we zoom out to the global context, especially in developing economies, the consequences of this fiscal structure they're extreme. Let's look at Latin America and the Caribbean.
The situation in the LAC region reveals the logical extreme of structural regressivity. It's a critical case study. In 6 countries across the region, fiscal policy, meaning the combined effect of the taxes they collect and the public spending they do, actually increases poverty.
Wait, say that again. You mean the state's intervention, which is supposedly meant to improve societal well-being, actively makes the poorest citizens poorer?
That is the inescapable conclusion from the data. It means that the poorest segments of the population are, in a very real and structural sense, net contributors to the fiscal system.
So they're paying more in taxes than they receive back.
They pay more in taxes, often these regressive consumption taxes, than they receive back in social benefits or public services. This structural dynamic is often summarized with a powerful, if bleak, phrase: socialize the costs, privatize the earnings.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase. How are the costs socialized?
Costs are socialized when necessary infrastructure, resources, and risk management, which primarily benefit private capital, are funded or subsidized by the public. This can involve public investment in transportation and communication networks that primarily facilitate private commercial activity.
Or even things like bailouts.
Or government bailouts, exactly. Or environmental cleanup costs associated with private sector pollution. The public absorbs the risk and the infrastructure expense. The earnings, however, are privatized, meaning the profits generated by that subsidized activity flow primarily to the wealthy elite.
The consequences of this structure are just heartbreakingly tangible when we look at basic public goods like education.
They are. Consider the direct financial shortfall caused by inadequate corporate taxation. If major companies in countries like Peru and Honduras actually paid their fair share of income taxes, the additional revenue generated could educate 8 to 10 times as many children who are currently not attending primary school.
8 to 10 times.
This is not about a minor adjustment. It's about a massive redirection of societal potential. When the poor are net contributors, the state loses both the revenue necessary to invest in human capital and the moral authority to claim it is serving the common good.
If the data in Latin America shows the fiscal system is actually increasing poverty, that can't be an accident or pure incompetence. We have to stop talking about the effects of the tax code and move to the structural causes.
Exactly.
Why does the system guarantee this upside-down outcome?
This is where we transition from symptoms to diagnosis, using elite and structural theories of the state. These theories argue that governance is not a neutral process. Policy formulation never occurs in an ideal, equal environment.
Of course not.
It takes place in highly unequal contexts, and when that happens, the resulting policies are inherently saturated with the interests of the powerful few.
And the general population perceives this power asymmetry pretty accurately.
They do. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 3/4 of the population believes that their government is fundamentally run by a small number of powerful groups for their own exclusive benefit.
And that's not just a perception.
It's not unfounded paranoia when you look at the sheer concentration of capital. The richest 1% in the LAC region owns a staggering 37% of the region's wealth. When wealth is concentrated to that degree, it converts directly and systematically into policy influence, ensuring policies are systematically biased against redistribution.
This moves us into the first heavy theoretical framework we need to unpack, the structural functionalist viewpoint, which suggests the state is functionally constrained by the economic system itself. It's an impersonal, almost deterministic force.
The core constraint here is what's called the dependency principle. This principle dictates that the state, regardless of the party in power or its ideological goals, is structurally dependent on private capital accumulation for 3 essential elements: its economic stability, its political legitimacy in the eyes of the public, and, most practically, its tax revenue.
So the state needs capital to grow the economy so the state can collect enough taxes to fund itself and therefore survive.
That's the engine of the constraint. This interdependence creates a powerful functional requirement. The state must respect the logic of accumulation. If a state attempts to significantly violate this logic, for example, by implementing radically highly progressive tax systems or nationalizing large productive industries, it is widely understood to trigger an immediate punishing reaction from capital.
You mean an investment strike?
Exactly, an investment strike or capital flight. That leads to declining business confidence, economic instability, and often a deep recession. The market, in effect, punishes the state for trying to redistribute wealth too aggressively.
But wait. Doesn't that theory eliminate the role of conscious political choice? Are you saying leaders can't choose a progressive path, or that they simply face extreme punishment if they do?
It suggests that conscious choices are made under extreme duress. The structural argument is that the fear of this automatic trigger mechanism, the economic blowback, systematically prevents the state from significantly increasing revenues in ways that directly confront capital.
It's a deterrent.
A massive one. Therefore, the functional effect of state policies, despite any stated social goals, is almost always to reproduce the existing unequal class structure and maintain the unequal distribution of opportunities and resources. Leaders may desire change, but they are held hostage by the economy's mood and the mobility of capital.
That helps explain the pressure cooker the state operates under. Now let's introduce the instrumental theory, which sees the state not just constrained by this impersonal structure, but as a direct tool actively influenced by the ruling class. This is where we look at the personnel involved.
Right. The instrumentalists argue that the capitalist class, a tiny fraction, maybe 0.5% to 1% of the total population, views capital as the most generalized, convertible source of power. This is a critical distinction.
What do you mean by convertible?
Capital isn't just market power. It can be seamlessly converted into political office, into legal and technical expertise, and into control over administrative processes.
So money doesn't just buy a lobbying session. It buys the people who draft the laws and regulations in the first place.
It leads to the literal colonization of the state apparatus. We see capitalists occupying the top command posts, what we call the state elite, and also the state managers, the lower-level career administrators. Instrumentalists emphasize that this system ensures an overarching cohesion within the government that is fundamentally capitalist in its content.
Which gives them what?
It provides the monopoly capitalist group with an unparalleled platform from which to initiate, modify, or veto virtually any national policy proposal.
And this colonization isn't just about hiring CEOs for cabinet positions. It's a filtering mechanism within the entire bureaucratic system, right?
Absolutely. The ideological apparatus of the state, including schools and elite universities, plays a screening role. Sure, high educational credentials are required for top policy positions, but more importantly, any evidence of anti-capitalist commitments is often a subtle or sometimes overt disqualification.
So it self-selects.
The result is that state managers are socialized into a very narrow ideological spectrum, ranging from strong conservatism to, at best, weak reformism. This ensures the content of state cohesion remains supportive of capital accumulation.
Okay, to bring these two theories together, the structural constraint and the instrumental colonization, how does the ruling class ensure its long-term survival, especially when faced with genuine popular demand for radical change, like demands for true redistribution or aggressive environmental protection? This is the strategic maneuver of corporate liberalism.
Corporate liberalism is a crucial political strategy, and it's primarily championed by finance capitalists. It is defined as a coordinated set of counterproposals designed specifically to undercut the genuine appeal of radical movements, whether that's populism, socialism, or deep environmentalism. It's a mechanism for managing social crisis.
It sounds like allowing a small leak to prevent the dam from bursting entirely.
That's the perfect analogy. Finance capital is actually considered the chief historical agent of moderate political reform. Why? Because few significant policy or institutional reforms are ever enacted without their tacit approval or their active guidance.
And they channel that guidance through what?
Through powerful, non-elected policy planning networks. Think of the Council on Foreign Relations or the Business Roundtable.
They set the terms of compromise. Can you give us an example of how a corporate liberal reform might protect the status quo while appearing to be progressive?
Sure. Consider a major financial crisis where there's intense populist demand for breaking up the big banks. The corporate liberal response wouldn't be to break up the banks. That's too radical.
So what would they do?
Perhaps they'd pass a highly complex piece of financial regulation that adds layers of compliance and new risk capital requirements. This satisfies the public's demand for doing something, but because the legislation is so incredibly complex, only the largest financial institutions, which already have huge compliance budgets, can actually handle it.
And the result is?
The result is that the reform protects the structural existence of the big banks by killing off their smaller competitors. It actually strengthens the overall structure of finance capital even while appearing to regulate it.
So when popular demands reach a crisis point, the outcome is almost always a corporate liberal variant of reform. And because progressive policy blocs often lack a strong base of power within this captured state apparatus, they are eventually forced to accept the corporate liberal plan.
which ultimately protects the long-term interests of capital, even at the expense of the moderate reformers themselves.
We've established the why, the structural inevitability that forces the state to prioritize capital. Now let's detail the specific, observable how. The mechanics of state capture that elites use to block redistribution and maintain this regressive fiscal structure.
We're moving into the realm of active sabotage of the democratic process. State capture is where elites co-opt or pervert state entities and public policies across their entire operational cycle. And we have clear data from Latin American and Caribbean case studies identifying the most common mechanisms. 2 of them occur with the highest frequency, 69% of the cases studied.
Let's start with the control of public debate, which you've called media feudalism.
Media feudalism refers to the mechanism of controlling the public debate agenda, dictating which issues are raised, and controlling the narrative around them. This is crucial for protecting elite interests because it shapes public opinion against any redistributive measures.
And there's a potent example from Paraguay in 2012.
A perfect one. It involved a debate over a proposed tax on soybean exports.
What was the direct connection between media ownership and the policy outcome in that case?
The ABC Color Daily newspaper, one of the country's most prominent media outlets, played a leading role in the media campaign that accompanied the removal of the president who supported the soya tax.
And the conflict of interest.
The owner of that newspaper, the late businessman Aldo Zuccarello, was simultaneously a major shareholder in Cargill, Paraguay, one of the country's main soybean exporters.
So the media campaign against the tax wasn't journalism. It was a direct, self-interested economic action disguised as public debate. The elite used their media control to directly overturn a political outcome that threatened their core profits.
That's precisely the definition of capture. It's an elite leveraging a platform of perceived neutrality, the news, to serve an immediate financial objective, avoiding taxation.
Okay, what's the second mechanism, also at that 69% frequency?
That would be the widely recognized revolving door.
Ah, the revolving door, where regulators become executives and executives become regulators.
It describes the unhindered movement of high-ranking officials between the public and private sectors. It reveals deep conflicts of interest among the political and economic elites. It's a mechanism for ensuring that state policy is handled by personnel who are sympathetic or even directly loyal to industry interests.
And you have an example from Argentina.
In Argentina, in 2017, the situation was stark. 40% of high-ranking officials in the Treasury and Public Finance Ministry were former CEOs or managers from the private sector.
40%. That is essentially allowing the regulated industries to staff the very government departments responsible for regulating them.
It creates a situation where the specialized knowledge and regulatory experience from public offices are transferred seamlessly to private organizations. And this knowledge transfer is highly valuable. The private sector gains access to insider knowledge on policy weaknesses and regulatory schedules, often to the detriment of the state's negotiating position and the broader public interest.
Moving beyond direct personnel control and media influence, how do elites manipulate the actual legal and bureaucratic processes? How do they fast-track privileged interests or delay unfavorable policies?
They frequently exploit legal frameworks to bypass due process. A key mechanism here is extraordinary regulatory procedures. This occurs in 62% of the cases we have data for.
And what does that mean in practice?
It means routinely breaching ordinary institutional mechanisms, which are designed to ensure deliberation and public participation, by resorting to urgent legislative bills, fast-tracked approvals, or contract addenda.
Can you give us a concrete example of this rule bending, maybe in the public workspace?
We see this clearly in public-private partnership, or PPP, contracts. In Peru in 2015, a staggering 62% of PPP contracts involved significant renegotiation or addenda shortly after the signing.
So they sign one deal and then immediately change it. How does that work?
Companies would intentionally submit aggressive, often non-viable bids to win the concession. They knew that once they were locked in, they could use these extraordinary regulatory procedures, claiming unforeseen circumstances or technical issues, to manipulate the terms after the agreement was signed. They are gaming the bidding process, knowing the rules can be changed post facto via regulatory loopholes.
That's a sophisticated form of institutional corruption. What about when elites use the highest levels of the legal system to outright block reforms?
That's the weaponization of the judiciary through prosecution and constitutional courts. Elites use the courts to halt or water down policies they dislike. In Guatemala, between 1996 and 2018, the Constitutional Court received hundreds of petitions specifically aimed at stopping or weakening tax reforms.
And the court becomes a de facto legislative body.
The court, often staffed by appointees sympathetic to elite interests, effectively serves as a veto mechanism. It allows economic elites to circumvent the normal, messy legislative process entirely.
These strategies highlight how complexity itself is weaponized. Let's talk about technical smokescreens.
Technical smokescreens, seen in about 31% of cases, are a crucial ideological tool. They involve repackaging fundamentally political decisions, such as whether or not to tax capital gains, as purely technical arguments.
And these arguments are presented with such complexity
that they effectively exclude the general citizenry and even non-specialist parliamentarians from effective debate.
How does that complexity specifically silence dissent? If a politician wants to argue against a corporate tax cut, how exactly does the technical smokescreen silence their voice?
It shifts the grounds of the argument. Instead of debating the ethics of taxing the poor more than the rich, the debate is forced onto terms of optimal efficiency, marginal rate of return on capital, or dynamic scoring models, concepts that only highly paid specialized economic consultants can debate fluently. This disproportionately empowers sectors with the deepest pockets to hire those experts, often through think tanks they fund, who then present corporate interests as if they were purely objective arguments, backed by complex models. The lay politician or the average citizen who relies on a simple, fairness-based argument is systematically marginalized and silenced by the sheer weight of technical jargon.
And we can't discuss policy capture without addressing the illicit financial flows that lubricate this entire system, especially bribery and the use of offshore opacity.
The scale of outright corruption is immense. The notorious Odebrecht case revealed that $780 million in bribes were paid across 10 Latin American and Caribbean countries between 2001 and 2016.
And that was just for public contracts.
Just for lucrative public contracts. This shows illegal influence peddling on a multinational scale.
And what role do tax havens play in all of this? They seem to be the ultimate structural protection for wealth.
Opacity in tax havens is crucial. Fictitious companies established offshore are used for two main purposes. First, to evade paying legitimate taxes, which erodes the state's tax base that might otherwise fund education or infrastructure.
And second,
to conceal illicit activities. In the Odebrecht example, these fictitious companies were explicitly used to launder money and camouflage the transparency of loans and payments made to corrupt politicians and public agents. This practice secures illicit influence while simultaneously starving the state of the legitimate revenue it needs.
We must bring this policy outcome back to the core theme of inequality, particularly along racial lines, because these policies don't distribute their harm evenly.
Not at all. The outcome of these structural and instrumental capture mechanisms is that the tax subsidies intended for wealthy taxpayers, such as generous deductions or preferential rates for capital gains income, disproportionately benefit high-income families and actively worsen both economic and racial inequality.
Can we quantify that racial impact?
The data provides specific, damning evidence of this structural bias. One analysis of federal capital gains tax preferences in the U.S. revealed that just 2% of the total tax preferences flowed to Black households.
Only 2%.
And only 3% flowed to Hispanic households. The vast majority of these benefits are channeled toward high-income, predominantly white families. This demonstrates how the tax system is structurally designed not just to favor the wealthy, but to reinforce existing gaps rooted in historic and current injustices, creating vast disparities in income and wealth across race and ethnicity.
We spent most of our time analyzing the structural inevitability and the mechanics of capture that maintain a system where basic existence is taxed while wealth is protected. Now, let's shift from the structural how to the philosophical should, the moral question of whether extreme wealth should be limited at all. This brings us to the concept of limitarianism.
Limitarianism is a powerful philosophical premise. It asserts that extreme wealth accumulation is inherently a moral issue because essential resources are scarce.
And this scarcity isn't just about money.
No, it's not just about dollars and cents. It applies critically to environmental resources, most notably the global carbon budget.
So it connects the economic injustice directly to climate injustice.
Precisely. The research highlights that globally, almost half of all emissions are caused by the world's wealthiest 10%. Extreme wealth enables extreme consumption, and that forces us to ask a profound moral question.
Which is?
Do the wealthy have a moral right to use natural resources so disproportionately, to effectively live beyond the planet's sustainable means, and thereby steal capacity from future generations or less fortunate contemporary people? Limitarianism compels us to approach wealth not merely as an economic achievement, but as an ethical claim on limited societal and planetary resources.
That forces us to confront the widely accepted narrative of rugged individualism, the idea that extreme wealth is purely the product of one person's merit and hard work.
That narrative simply doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The philosophical argument here is that wealth is always created through collaboration. No single individual operates in an economic vacuum. All extreme wealth is a product of a collective effort, operating within contexts shaped by countless societal inputs.
You mean things like public education, infrastructure?
Public education, publicly funded research and development, established legal frameworks, protected intellectual property, and functioning infrastructure, yes.
So the hyper-wealthy depend on the public system for their success, yet the system is taxed regressively to maintain that very infrastructure.
It creates a massive philosophical contradiction. We are seeing a slow shift in perspective among some elites themselves, though. Individuals like Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, have explicitly acknowledged this collective nature of wealth creation.
And there are groups like the patriotic millionaires.
Exactly. They publicly advocate for measures like higher taxes on their own wealth, recognizing that the societal contribution to their fortunes is immense.
This philosophical look also gives us a clear comparative view of different economic models.
It really does. It reveals the massive social and ecological costs of hypercapitalism. We see that countries like the US, which features the highest wealth concentration among developed nations, correlates with a lower overall quality of life for the general population and significantly higher CO2 emissions compared to nations with more mixed or highly regulated economies.
So allowing extreme accumulation is demonstrably detrimental.
To both social equity and planetary health, yes.
If we accept the moral and environmental argument against extreme wealth, what are the actionable political steps suggested to curtail it? Moving beyond just the simple concept of income tax.
The suggested measures are divided into 3 types, and they're framed as political decisions informed by these ethical principles.
Okay, first we have predistribution.
Predistribution aims for a fairer distribution of resources up front, before the state even steps in with taxes or benefits. This includes measures like aggressively raising the minimum wage to ensure a living wage, strengthening labor unions' negotiating power, or initiating an open debate about the vast disparities between public sector and private sector wages.
Getting the distribution right from the start.
Exactly. Ensuring resources are distributed more equally from the beginning of the economic process.
Second, the traditional focus, redistribution.
This focuses primarily on tax measures and the social security system. And the key structural suggestion here is to reverse the current regressive trend.
How?
By introducing higher taxes on capital, meaning profit, rent, and interest income, and fundamentally lowering taxes on labor income earned through work. This strategy directly attacks the structural imbalance we identified at the very beginning of our conversation. It promotes economic stability while reducing inequality.
And finally, the ethical aspect, which the discussion acknowledges has its limitations. Voluntary measures.
Right. Voluntary measures involve making a moral appeal, such as urging the hyper-wealthy to voluntarily cap their consumption or contribute more aggressively to philanthropy. However, the philosophical discussion is realistic here.
It's not enough on its own.
It notes that while moral appeals are necessary, behavioral research shows that moral preaching alone is largely ineffective as a standalone tool. These ethical arguments primarily serve to inform and justify the necessary structural and redistributive political choices.
To bring this whole philosophical arc back to the individual, what does the study of the economics of happiness tell us about the utility of accruing extreme wealth? Does more money actually equate to proportional increases in well-being?
The research into the economics of happiness reveals a powerful counter-narrative to the logic of accumulation. Money is essential, let's be clear. It is a prerequisite for meeting basic needs, and financial worries undeniably damage well-being. But beyond a certain point necessary for security, the adaptation effect kicks in.
The hedonic treadmill.
Exactly. Happiness does not increase indefinitely with wealth. People quickly adapt to their new, higher level of consumption and financial security. This finding, which has been noted for decades now, suggests that continually accumulating wealth beyond a point of security and comfort yields rapidly diminishing returns in personal happiness.
And we see that quantified even in wealthy countries with high standards of living.
We do. Consider the Netherlands, a highly developed nation. In one study, the richest 20% of the population rated their happiness at a 7.8 out of 10.
Okay.
The poorest 20% ranked theirs at around 7. The difference is remarkably small. This demonstrates that extreme wealth concentration does not equate to proportional increases in well-being for the individual accumulator. The relentless pursuit and protection of wealth comes at an extremely high social and ecological cost for a very minor marginal return in individual happiness.
This deep dive has shown us that the obscure utility surcharge that angered my friend is far from an anomaly. It is the latest iteration of an ancient fiscal logic pecunia non olet, a system structurally designed to monetize basic existence while protecting vast accumulation of capital. This upside-down system is sustained not by accident, but by profound structural constraints, specifically the state's dependency on private capital, and through active policy capture mechanisms like media feudalism, the revolving door, and the deliberate use of technical smokescreens designed to obscure political decisions behind jargon.
The core dynamic at play is that structural limitation imposed on the administrative state by its inherent need for tax revenue and economic stability. This dependency forces the state to make choices that systematically reinforce the unequal distribution of resources. So fiscal policies are therefore not just technical budgeting problems, they're fundamentally contests over political and economic power, where minority elite interests successfully saturate the decision-making process, often leading to outcomes that actively worsen conditions for the majority. The fundamental reality of taxation today is this: money needs to flow to maintain the system, but the systems of power ensure that flow is overwhelmingly unidirectional. It moves from the many, via regressive taxation on life's necessities, to the few who shelter their fortunes and influence behind complexity and offshore opacity. Money may not stink in the physical sense, but the systemic inequality inherent in the way it is distributed and extracted certainly does.